Welcome everybody to the Get Back on Track for your HSC despite a pandemic. I'm Fiona Davidson and I'm from UTS Insearch, and we're very proud to present Rowan Kunz, CEO of Art of Smart. He is the author of Secrets of HSC Success. He has conducted 10 years of research with Australian top performing students. We also have Chris Kateo, who is our student, was our student and is now a successful student at UTS. So welcome Rowan and welcome Chris.
Brilliant. Thanks Fiona for the welcome, and hello to everyone who has joined this webinar. Looking forward to getting to know you a little better. Now, for those of you that are attending, just so that we can make the most of the time that we have together today, and also so that Chris and I can help you as much as possible in this time, I'd love to get to know you a little bit. We have a chat. I've got access to the chat and I can see it. I'd love you to introduce yourself in the chat and just let me know your name. What is the one subject that you wish you could turn around the most between now and your HSC exams, and maybe what's a course that you're thinking about attending university and UTS for. So let me know in the chat. That'll just help both Chris and myself frame what we cover in today's session. We'd love to get to know you a little bit better. Now, kicking off today's session, I'm assuming that all of you are here perhaps dialing into this webinar because maybe your trial results didn't quite look as good as you would like. And obviously there's many good reasons for this, COVID obviously being the really big one. And so perhaps you worked really hard and stuff just got in the way and your trials were not quite where you wanted them to be. And now we've got an 8-week period to somehow identify what can you do to turn them around, to improve your results in your HSC exams so you can ultimately maximize options. And that's what we're going to be really diving in today. We're going to be looking at how can you, over a fairly short period of time, make significant improvements in your results so that you can do better in your HSC exams, hopefully maximize your ATAR and create more options for yourself when it comes to study at university and at UTS more broadly. Now, before we dive in today and actually dig into it, I want to introduce Chris. Meet Chris, and Chris is also here on the call as well. And I'm just going to share my screen in a moment. But before I do, I guess, Chris, I'd love for you to just share your story, because I know that you, not that long ago, were sitting in the exact same position that perhaps many of the students attending today's webinar are in, where you got your trials back. Tell us about it. What happened? How did you go? And then what did things look like at the end of the journey?
Sure thing, absolutely. So, hello everyone, I'm Chris, and thinking about those years ago, my trial results weren't good at all. I think getting them back, they were bad. It didn't really dawn on me how bad they were. And I didn't really know what to do, but
and when you say bad, just so that we can get some sense, everyone who's listening can also get some hope as well. Like, how bad are we talking about? Are we talking about like 40%, 30%, 60%? So what are we looking at?
I would say that my results were around the bottom 5 of my school, the bottom 10. And I would say bottom 5, and they weren't good at all. They weren't really reflective of my peers and my classmates and my friends. And it was quite daunting, but now I managed to get through it, go do engineering at UTS, and also look into teaching further in addition to engineering. So that's me now.
So you've had your trials, and as you said, you were bottom 5 of your cohort, and then at the end of the journey, you get in. You've completed an engineering degree at UTS. Is that correct?
Well, I am in the process of doing engineering, but also looking into teaching too. But yes, I very much got into my engineering degree.
Which was your dream degree. Like, ultimately, that's where you wanted to go. And so the point of this, guys, and we're going to unpack how do you do this in today's session? But Chris's story is a really great example of someone that probably maybe where you're feeling right now, like, man, I screwed it. Like, I didn't do well. And yet Chris's story is a powerful example of how, despite that, he was still able to get into his dream degree at UTS. And then of course, now even exploring, going back and becoming a teacher, which is also really incredible as well. Now, great. I've got a couple of people that in the chat have introduced themselves. So Maddie, welcome. Welcome, Belle. If I'm mispronouncing your names, I apologize. Welcome, Charlie. Great to see you guys. We've got English Advanced being trouble, science degree for Charlie, biology and a Bachelor of Economics at UTS. Amazing guys. And Mad's looking at nursing and midwifery. If you've just joined the webinar, let me know who you are. Let me know what your name is, what subject you wish you could just transform your marks for between now and your trial, your HSC exam, sorry. And then what course or degree you're exploring studying at UTS. Now, I'm just going to share my screen and I'm going to bounce back to Chris as we go throughout today's session, because the strategies I'm going to share with you are strategies that Chris himself used to turn his results around. And so they're not things that just sound nice. They're really practical, tangible things that you can do. Now, I've just hopefully shared my screen. Now, what would be amazingly helpful, guys, is if you can just give me a thumbs up in the chat if you can see my screen. That would be really helpful, just so I can make sure that we're all on top of it. Now, what I want to share today, guys, is that the strategies we're going to unpack is not just strategies that worked for Chris, although they are. Over the last decade, I've interviewed now more than 2,500 students that got ATARs over 98, and not just got great ATARs, they also did it in a way where they, maintained their health. They continued to look after their health, stay healthy by, exercising, having a social life and doing other things. So the strategies I'm trying to really share here are not ones that are going to involve you, having to study for hours and hours and hours and end to somehow turn your results around. It's really about studying smart. And that's going to be the focus of today's session. Now, all of the strategies come from this research, so they're proven. It's worked for other students, so I know it's going to work for you. Now, you might be sitting there and thinking, but okay, maybe that only works for students that are really smart. We've applied this research. So I lead an organization called Art of Smart Education. We've applied this research with 5,000 students plus over the last 10 years from all walks of life, from all schools, all around New South Wales. No matter where they were at, whether or not they were failing or doing a little bit better. And on average, the mark improvements they've seen has been almost 20%. So I say that is just really powerful proof that I know that each one of you that is logged in to listen to this webinar can significantly improve your results in a short period of time. So I'm hopefully going to share with you how to do that. So it is possible to bounce back, and Chris's story is a very powerful example of yes, you can do that. Now, what's the plan of attack in today's webinar? And welcome Cleo, welcome Grace. Awesome to get to know you guys. We've got English Advanced, Math Standard, we've got a Bachelor of Fashion and Textiles. Welcome Taryn Preet as well, or Taryn. It's great to see all you. Now, the plan for today is we're going to cover 4 things. Number one, I want to give you a little bit of practical hope to just really show you very much how you can bounce back. And so I'm going to briefly look at some stuff here in terms of what you can do differently. We're then going to go through a process of actually needing to identify, well, what went wrong? If we're going to change things, we need to know what wasn't working. And so we're going to do a strategy and unpack a strategy there. What I'm then going to help you with is how do you develop a plan of attack over the next 8 weeks so that you know what you need to do each week so that you can turn things around for whether or not it's biology or English or maths or physics, whatever the subject is that you've let me know that you're needing the most help with. And so that's going to be our plan for today's session. Now, where possible, Chris and I and the team from UTS Insearch, we're here to answer your questions. So if you've got questions, there is a Q&A section that you can jump in and ask them. You can also ask the questions in the chat. If I can answer them during the chat, during the sort of presentation as we go, I will. If I can't, you've got an amazing team here, across Chris, Fiona, Belinda from the UTS Insearch team as well. They're going to be able to jump in and answer your questions. So by all means, don't be shy. Ask questions and get engaged just so that we can help you as much as we can in the time we have together. So let's sort of orientate ourselves right now. At the moment, all of you, I'm assuming you're all in year 12, and that's why you're dialing in. We're all sitting right about here, okay? It's term 3. We've got, 4 weeks, a little bit less, 3 weeks or so less of school. And so if we look at the entire journey that is, year 12, you're almost at the end of it. Okay. And so it's easy as a result to think, well, okay, like if I haven't done as well as I would have liked over this period, my trials and my prior results, maybe I'm in trouble and maybe I'm not going to quite get the results I was hoping for. Now, I think it's why most of the time when we look at this, we could actually contextualize it that you're actually 80% of the way through the HSC in terms of time. So from a time point of view, you're almost done, and that's probably a little exciting, a little scary at the same time. Now, the important thing we need to note here, guys, is that, and you might already be aware of it, but I want to reinforce it because it's so, so critical. Your internals are only worth 50% of your total HSC mark. So that means that if you have screwed up everything that you have done so far, in that you haven't done as well as you've wanted, it's only worth 50%. And if your trials, like most trials are only worth about 30%. So if you just happen to not do so well in your trials alone, we're going to halve that because that's only going to be worth actually 15% to your total HSC results. And so what this means is that if the internal is only worth 50%, we've got a lot of marks left on the table for you in your external exams to really fight for and make a difference. And so really, if we think about this, you've got 100% of your internal assessments now completed. And this is what they're all worth. So you are currently here. Now, if we recontextualize this, we're going to halve all of those internal assessment results because this is only worth 50%. And we're now going to look at the fact that we've got a fat 50% sitting here where you can significantly shift your results. So what I really want to encourage you, no matter if you're keeping on getting, marks back from your trials and you're looking at them and you're like, oh, this is just getting me more and more down because it's just not what I was hoping for. The real critical message here is whatever you do, don't give up. So many students right now quit. They look at their trial results and they go, you know what? I'm stuffed. I can't turn things around, and they give up. And what that fails to take into account is that you have 50% of your marks still left on the table. Now, Chris, I want to throw to you for a moment because you didn't quit, which is fantastic. But how did you feel at this point? You're at this point here, right, where you've got these trial results back and they're not what you were hoping for. How did you feel?
Oh, I felt terrible, very much so. I didn't feel like I had the option to quit, but I didn't really know where to move forward into what to concentrate on studying after I got my trials. So it was just this idea of, okay, I know I'm bad at this. I know I'm bad at this, but I know this. And if I can get this and keep these marks, now I'll just study for that and maybe work on the stuff I'm bad at a little bit, which I didn't really have much of an idea, but I knew I had to keep going.
Cool, great. And I think that's a key message, guys. I hope you really all take that because as students quit, it also gives you, the opportunity relatively to, improve in your externals and then overall, lift, your ATAR. And an ATAR is ultimately a rank. It's not a mark, right? It's a rank, lining up you and all of your peers. And so if other people are starting to not do the work and give up and you're pushing on, it's going to enable you relative to your peers to lift your ATAR and your options. So really critical. You still have 50% to fight for. Okay, this is so, so important. And so I don't want any of you that are on this webinar right now, and I want you to all make a commitment to yourself and to me, if that helps, that you're not going to quit and you're not going to give up and you're going to keep on going until you put that final pen down in your final exam for your HSC exams. Because ultimately, the final 50% in your HSC exams can significantly improve your overall results and create more options. So that's just the practical. You can turn it around because of the structure of the HSC. Even though you're 80% of the way through in time, you're only 50% of the way through in marks, and that creates an opportunity to turn things around. So now that we've established just, guys, you really can turn things around. And I'm just going to see, I think we might have a question here that's come through. Okay, cool. I'm going to try to answer that, Amy. I've seen your question, Amy, and I'll do my best to answer that a little bit later, perhaps. If we get an opportunity towards the end, I'll talk about that as well. So strategy number one that I want to unpack, and this goes to Chris's point, because Chris realized that he needed to not quit. And I'm hopeful that all of you are on the same page now as well. You know that you're not going to quit. what do you do, right? What's the practical steps you need to take? So the first strategy is, really an incredibly simple one, but it's a really important one. And that's to get clear on what your goals are going to be for the HSC exams. Like if you don't have a clear set of what you want to achieve between now and 8 weeks time, how do you know how much work you need to do, what work you need to do, what you need to focus on? If we don't have a goal to direct the next 8 weeks of your time, it's going to be really hard to get the necessary motivation, the necessary focus, and the appropriate study plan in place to make that become a reality. And so there's a really simple thing that we can do here. And I want all of you, if you've got an exercise book and a pen and a paper, I want you to pull it out now. And I hope you've all turned up to a webinar with some pen and paper, or just pull open a Google Doc or a Word doc on your computer, whatever it's going to be. I want you to take some notes. And what I want you to do is I want you to go through each of your subjects and I want you to identify, well, okay, what was my trial mark? Like as painful as it might be to write it down, you might want to just tear it up and burn it and never to see it again. I want you to write it down. Because part of leaning into that pain is to recognize, well, I've got to make some changes here. So I want you to write down, okay, maybe it's biology, and maybe you got like a 55%. It was just a bad day, super stressed, missed some key content, whatever. And then I want you to take a step back and I want you to go, okay, what's my goal mark going to be here? Like, what do I want to really try to achieve in the next 8 weeks? And so maybe for biology, you're like, what, if I could somehow turn that into an 80%, that would be amazing. And then what I want you to do is I want you to calculate the gap. Like, how much do you need to lift your marks by? Now, of course, there's some moderation stuff that'll change your internal mark. But for now, you can't control that. That's going to be based on how your cohort performs in the HSC. So we just want to keep it simple. We want to go, okay, cool. I've got a goal here. Maybe it's 25%. Like I've got to look at, how do I, over the next 8 weeks, turn my biomarker around from 55 to 80? I've got a 25% gap I've got to close. So I want you right now, guys, if you're not already, to quickly do this for at least the one subject that you listed in the chat that you're like, yep, that was a train wreck. I need to turn it around. I want you to write it down, write your trial mark, write your goal mark, write your gap, because that's what the next 8 weeks is all going to be about. How do we close this gap? Now, Chris, what was one of the subjects that you did this for?
I did this for software design and development. Yes, software design and development, trying to close the gap.
So what was what was, if you mind sharing for everyone, what was your trial mark? What was the goal mark you set for yourself? And then what was the gap?
Let's see, my trial mark was around the early 70s. So around 71, 72%. And I wanted to get it to mid 80s, so 85. So the gap was about 15 marks.
Cool. So you had a 15% gap. Great. And then once you knew that you had that gap, how did that shift your mindset?
That it shifted that I felt comfortable with the subject, but I wanted to be able to get better. And so it was just me focusing and pushing myself to kind of represent that mark on the paper for the HSC.
Cool. And so to some extent, what I'm hearing is that it sort of lifted your motivation as well, right? Because you had this clear, like, how do I do this? Let's push to make this happen.
Very much so for that subject specifically, yes.
Awesome. So guys, if you haven't, and maybe I'd love someone, you don't need to tell me what your marks are. That's cool. Like I get, but I'd love to see, like, maybe someone, I'd love you to share in the chat, like, what's the gap you're committing to change for one of your subjects? Right? You can just say, it's like, it's a 10%, it's a plus 15, it's a plus 7, it's a plus 20, whatever it is. We're not going to know what subject it is. I'd love you to make that commitment as part of this goal setting. Studies show that if you write stuff down and you share it with other people, you're more likely to actually go away and put the action in place to make it a reality. And myself and the team from UTS Insearch, we generally want to see you turn things around and maximize some of the options that you have for yourself. Amazing, Charlie. Kudos for the courage. Great. We've got people sharing. We've got 22 kind of stretch, but hey, that's part of the goal. We've got Tehran that's got 25% for physics. Amazing, guys. Let's pop those down. Keep them coming. Now, strategy number 2. Now that we know what you're needing to change for one subject or multiple subjects, we now need to really dial into, well, what comes next, right? Like, okay, I've got a pain. Thanks, Belle, for sharing. You got a 10% gap there. How do we start to close that gap? Now, I'm going to say this as nicely as possible. I don't know any of you, so, don't take it too personally. But I'm going to say that everyone dialing into this call is a little bit crazy. Now, I'm going to say that, and it's coming from the nicest possible place, guys, because one of the things that I find, Charlie's like, yes, one of the things that I find is that, and Albert Einstein said it, insanity is doing the same thing over and over again and expecting different results. And I want to run through a little bit of a scenario, and you can let me know in the chat if this is at all true for you in even a little bit of a way. And what I find often happens is, we do a whole bunch of study. Maybe not so much study, but we do some study. Okay, we have an exam, we get our results back, and unfortunately, they're not so good. We're not so happy with it. Maybe we decide that we don't like the results, and we, sort of scrumple them up, don't look at them again, shove them at the bottom of our bag, or under our bed, or in a bin, maybe. And then the next time we have an exam, we go back and we sort of study in a pretty similar way. But this time, fingers crossed, toes crossed, everything crossed. You're like, please let my results be better. Please let them be better, right? Now, maybe I'm dramatizing it a little, but I think at some base level, we tend to do this, right? We tend to have the same study habits, yet hope that our results are going to shift. And what I want to share, guys, is that we need to change your results. We need to change them by the gap. We've got 22, 25, 10 that's been shared. We need to change it by the gap. And so unless you're going to make change in how you study, I'm going to be really honest with you, your results won't change. We can help you change your results, but you're going to need to create tangible changes in what you're doing. If that doesn't happen, what your trials look like are going to be pretty similar to what your HSC looks like. And so we've got to think about, if we've got 8 weeks, what are the key changes you need to make? Now, I don't know each of you individually, but I bet that if we've got a couple of prompts and some frameworks that you can use, I bet you actually probably already know a bunch of the things that you could probably change that would significantly, have a positive impact in improving your results. So one of the things that we've found in all of our research with high-performing students is that in most cases, your results in your trials was probably an equation of these 3 things. What you did to study before the exam, right? So what you were doing in the lead up, over the period of, maybe the 2 or 3 weeks before, what you were doing the night before the exam. So, was it a late night cram? You were freaking out up to 2 a.m. in the morning, chugging V's and Red Bulls and coffees. And then what did you do during the exam on the day? Did you run out of time? Did you miss a page? Did you get really anxious? Did you get a mental blank? Did you just get stumped by a question and spend too much time on it? So typically, whatever result you got in your trial, the result for physics or biology or maths, it was a result of these 3 things. This plus this is going to equal your exam result. And so if we know that these are sort of the 3 key areas that are going to contribute to your result, what we need to reflect on is we need to do a reflection on, well, what were you doing for each of these 3 things? Okay, 1, 2, and 3. And then what do we need to do differently for each of these 3 things so that you don't repeat your trial performance in your HSC? So really simple activity that we need to think about. And it's all about thinking about what we need to change. So what I'd love you to do, and again, if you've got a Google Doc or a Word doc or a piece of paper, do this exercise with me now. If you say you're going to do it later, guarantee that you won't. We're all epic procrastinators. And I'm sure you're as much of a procrastinator as I am. So do it now while we're on the call so that you are actually leaving here with something tangible. And what I want you to do is I want you to, for the subject, maybe it was English that you were talking about that you did the worst at. I want you to, and don't worry so much about the weekly habit. I want you to focus on these 3 columns here. Okay, study before the exam, night before, during the exam. And I want you to, for English or maths or biology or economics or whatever it is the subject is that you're wanting to change your results for, what I want you to do is I want you to write down, being really honest with yourself, what were you actually doing? What study did you actually do for that exam? And maybe you're like, well, I read my notes out, I wrote 1 practice essay. I listened to I watched the film the night before because I hadn't read the text. Hopefully that wasn't the case, right? But you write down, what did you actually do? And then same thing night before, while I was cramming, I went to sleep at, 2 a.m. I was madly trying to write like an imaginative piece for Mod C because I suck at it. And then during the exam, like I ran out of time. I did the paper in a chronological order. Maybe I got a mental blank. Just like what happened, okay? What did you do? That's step number one. And we need to sort of get this out here because this is really the diagnosis step. To be able to identify what you need to change and do differently, you first need to get a sense of, well, what did you do? Maybe some of this stuff was actually pretty good, and we don't want to throw all of it out. We want to keep what's good. We want to change what's not good and change it to something that's more positive. So, take a moment now, guys. I want you to really quickly jump in and try to map out what did you actually do. Super quick. I'll give you 15 seconds just to try to just brain dump it, put it down as quickly as possible. Now, while we're doing this, Chris, while everyone's filling in their own diagram here, what out of the three of these criteria, these three areas, study before an exam, night before an exam, during an exam, what was the area that you realized on reflection for software design and development you were the worst at, and that really played the biggest impact in your results?
I would say the first criteria, studying before the exam.
Okay.
I did realize early, and I did have some emotional investment in the subject. I like the subject a lot. So when I got my results, I went, oh, okay, all right. I know I need to give it, more than just a little more. So yes, a little bit early.
So guys, I'd love you to share in the chat as we're about to move into the next part of this activity. Out of these three broad areas, what do you think was your biggest problem for that subject? Was it the study before the exam you were doing? Was it what you were doing the night before the exam? Was it during the exam, the panic and the time and the stress? Let me know in the chat. I'd love to get a sense of where it is that you think actually, wow, yep, like that's the part that killed me for my trials. So during for sure. Yep. Thanks, Charlie. That's not good to hear. And I love others. Let us know what part of it, right, is actually your cause. Because that's important, because if that's the part that caused you the most trouble, then whatever plan we put in place over the next 8 weeks to turn things around, it needs to target that area that, clearly got in the way for you. Thanks, Cleo, for sharing. We've got study before the exam. So it sounds like getting the work consistently happening before. Study before by Turan. Mads procrastinated. And so it was a bit of a mixture of the procrastination causing a crazy night before, causing a panic. So it was like the study before the exam that then had a flow-on effect into night before and during. Definitely seen that as well. You're not alone on that, Maddie. Now, what's the next step here, guys? Well, what I want you to now do is I want you to now reflect again, and maybe just for now, focus on the one area, just from a time point of view, that you identified was your biggest area of screw up that had the biggest contributions. If it was study before the exam, focus there. If it was not before the exam, focus there. If it was during the exam, focus there. And what I'd love you to do is, what are you going to change? Looking at what you did, I want you to write down, okay, here's what I think I need to do differently as my plan for this particular area for my HSC exams. And as I said, I don't know you individually, but I bet looking at what you did here, reading my notes, only writing one practice essay, that doesn't sound like a great prep. What do I need to do differently? Well, okay, like I'm going to write some more practice essays. I'm going to write, maybe I'm going to write, a mod A plus B practice essay. I'm going to write a common module practice essay. Maybe I'm going to write an imaginative and a discursive. Maybe I'm going to practice doing some thesis development work. Okay, I want you to write down whatever the area it is that you're in. And by all means, after this webinar, go and flesh this out even more, because this is how you build a solid plan that's going to target your weak areas. I want you to identify what is it that you need to do differently. So I'm going to give you guys 15 or so seconds to do that. And while you're doing that, Chris, what did you identify that you were going to do differently in the lead up to your HSC for software design and development?
So with software design and development, I got all the questions I could find, both from the textbook and previous exams, and I would just work through it. Just get into the exam mindset and the exam flow, and
Amazing.
just get as much on paper experience as possible.
Great. So it sounds like your big change was study before and really elevating the number of practice questions you were doing.
Yes, getting the reps in.
Okay, great. Like that's going to be the key sort of lever I'm going to pull, because if I do that, I think it's really going to shift my results. So guys, what I'd love you to do is in the chat, let me know, what's the one big thing there that you wrote down that you're going to change about whatever area it was out of these three different broad sort of factors over the next 8 weeks. Because remember, insanity is doing the same thing over and over and over again and expecting different results. And so you're gonna have to create change. So awesome, Bell. That was lightning fast. Do more practice papers. Fantastic. Now, what I'd love you guys, as you're writing it, is to think about do more practice papers is great, but it's also really vague. Like, is that 1 practice paper? Is that 2 practice papers? Is that 15 practice papers? So as you start to think about what it is that you're going to change, think about, okay, well, how much in terms of like marks, okay, great, right? It's like, what's the number of times you might need to do something, or how long are you going to do it for? Okay, great. So thanks. It's fantastic, guys. Charlie, we've got Taran also sharing practice papers to understand concepts. Awesome work, guys. So let's keep on moving and let's jump into strategy number 3. Now, strategy number 3, what is it? Well, once you've sort of got that, we now need to think about, well, what's the actual first thing that you should do when you start studying for your HSC exams? And I'd love you guys to let me know. And Mads, awesome work for sharing in the chat as well. What do you think is the first thing that you should start working on for studying for your subjects for the HSC exams in 8 weeks? What do you reckon it is? Let me know in the chat. I'd love to get a sense of what you think it is. Is it like reviewing notes? Is it practice papers? Is it writing essays? Is it something else? What do you think? Give you guys 10 seconds maybe. I'd love to see someone. Just don't think too hard. Just type it up like, hey, yep, this is what I was going to do first up. Let me know in the chat. Review the syllabus. Awesome, Claire. That's a great start. Anyone else? Someone else share. What else what's the first thing you guys are thinking of like just doing? Maybe even next week, this week, because you've got your trial results back. Cool, having a clear mindset, a clear goal, great, cool, which is what we're working on. Great, Taran. Lots of look at feedback from trials. Tegan, that is amazing. Emoji sort of applause on that one, right? That's fantastic. Yes, right? One of the things that is so overlooked is that often we get the feedback back from our trials and we sort of look at it and we're like, yeah, okay, that's painful. And maybe we don't want to look at it because it's too painful. Your trials have just told you all of the mistakes that you are likely to make in your HSC exams. So that's really valuable information. Now, just to give you a quick analogy, if we were playing basketball or netball or whatever, and you had to take a shot and you took the shot and you missed it, just having someone come up to you and explain how to shoot it, or reading, this is how you shoot, is not going to change the next time you take a shot, actually increasing the likelihood of you getting it in. What's actually going to increase the likelihood of you getting it in is you taking a bunch of practice shots, right? And actively trying to recreate the shot to get it in. And so the point here is with your trials, ultimately looking at the feedback that you've been given, hearing your teacher explain it in a class makes it always easier. Like, oh yeah, that makes sense. I get that now. That was silly. Why didn't I do it? But that won't actually change the habit that you have created in how you answer that question. And so the most critical way to actually change that habit is to retake your mistakes from your trials. So, if that was maths, actually going through the paper and finding all the ones that you get a mistake and then actually redoing it and then marking it to make sure you got it right. If it was, English and it was an essay and you got feedback from your teacher on the essay, it would be enhancing that essay, using that feedback and then submitting it once again for feedback. So actually retaking your mistakes is going to be the most powerful way that you can not make those same mistakes in your HSC exams. And that alone will see your marks improve, I guarantee it, in your HSC exams. It's so, so simple and really, really powerful. So please retake your mistakes. Now, Importantly, just doing the mistake once isn't going to be enough to actually rewire your brain to prevent you from making that mistake again. Okay, and once again, the basketball analogy, we miss the shot. Later in the day, we take a practice shot, you get it in. At that point, you wouldn't go, great, I don't need to practice anymore. I'm going to nail that shot every single time it happens, because you won't, right? What you'd probably do is you'd probably take a bunch of practice shots until you've done it 10 times in a row, getting it in. And then you're like, yep, I'm pretty confident I'm going to get the ball in the hoop. And so the same thing applies here. And one of the things that we found from our research with state rankers, particularly for your maths and science related sort of subjects, was a strategy that they call the double down on mistakes strategy. I mean, this was in fact, certainly a state ranker strategy for maths, very much so on the sciences, and very simple. You look at your, and I'll just see if I can get a different color. That's probably not going to make it any better. Let's go with black. So you'd look at your mistakes in your trials. You'd redo those mistakes in your trials. And then this strategy involves finding 2 similar questions and redoing those. And it's important because redoing your trial question is going to actually be relatively easier than redoing a unique question. 1, because you're familiar with it already. 2, maybe your teacher explained it to you. And so the goal here is very much you want to redo it to 2 similar questions, because that way you're really making sure that you can apply that knowledge to different question types. So that's essentially one of our key state ranker strategies for maths. Now, strategy number 4. This strategy, guys, builds, and you're going to see that all of these strategies end up building on each other. And I don't want to freak you out too much, maybe a little bit, and just a little bit so that you're like, geez, I got to get cracking. You've got, as of sort of yesterday, you've got 50 days until exam number 1 for your HSC. Now, if we're assuming you do 3 hours of study every single day over the next 50 days, and you might think, oh no, that's a lot. Maybe that's not a lot. The point being is that's 150 hours of study time. Now, if you've got 10 units, minimum, 5 subjects, right? That's 30 hours of study between now and your HSC exam for your each individual subject. Now, 30 hours is not a long time. That's going to go pretty quickly because, a past paper might take you 2 to 3 hours. If you've said, oh, you know what, I want to do 3 past papers, let's assume it's 3 hours, plus you're going to mark it, that's maybe 12 hours already gone. Almost half of that study time is already going to disappear just by doing a couple of past papers. So the point here is that with this time that you've got to think really critically about what you focus on. You're probably not going to be able to cover everything that you would like to, and we've got to focus on what matters most over the next 8 weeks. Now, the strategy that we have to share with this is something we call the traffic light system. And the traffic light system is really simple. I want you to, using your trial results and the feedback that you got on that, I want you to take out the syllabus for your subject, and I want you to go through it and look at every dot point and topic. And I want you to ask yourself, if I got this in my HSC exams tomorrow, how would I go? Would I get this question right? And if you think you would get it right, I want you to, highlight it green. Right, it's cool. I'm okay with that. That's good. Now, if you looked at it and you're like, oh, bugger, I think I would probably lose some marks on this, I want you to highlight it orange. And if you look at it and you're like, oh crap, I am absolutely screwed. I want you, I would lose almost all the marks here. I want you to highlight it red. Now, what this is going to give you is it's going to give you a nice little frame of areas that you should focus on. Now, because we're 8 weeks out, we've got a little bit of time, and you should focus, therefore, in your study on red areas first. And, I'd be focusing on your red areas, particularly over the next really 2 to 4 weeks, which is while you're still at school and you can ask your teachers for help. You can work with friends more easily. You've got lots of support that's accessible. As you get closer to the exams, your goal is you want to try to turn red into orange, and you want to try to turn orange into green, with the hope that by the time you get to your HSC exams, you've got a whole lot less red, a whole lot less orange, and you've focused on the stuff that's going to move the needle the most. Because if you just work on the green stuff first, your results aren't going to change. And most of the time, we tend to do study in a linear fashion. So we do topic 1, we then study for topic 2, we then do topic 3. And the problem is you might know topic 1. Topic 1 might be green. That is a bad investment of your time right now. We want to do the hardest stuff now while you've got the most time and the most support available to help you with it. So what I want you to do is I want you to write down in the chat super quickly right now, because I know all of you will already have a really good gut feel for the subject that you wrote down. What was the area that you know is red that you're going to have to work on ASAP, right? Is it your mod C? Is it, differentiation? Is it, I don't know, calculus? Is it whatever it is, for whatever subject, right? Is it titration for chemistry? Is it, Malus law for physics? Whatever it is, right? Write it down in the chat. Let me know. I'd love to see what it is. Awesome. Now, one of the little flicks, little tricks you can do, guys, and this is something that Julia did. She cut all the syllabus dot points up. She put them in little see-through bags. She put a colored sticker on the top of each of the bags, red, yellow, green, and she'd pull out a dot pointer out of a red bag, and she'd use that to actually do a study. And when she felt that it was better, she'd plug it into either the orange or the green bag. And that way she could physically see that she was emptying the bags. Really powerful idea. Now, I'm mindful of time, guys, and I want to make sure that we can get through all the strategies that we have here, and also share, a little bit of some of the final things that Chris did to make sure that he could get into UTS Insearch, which is really important. And awesome, guys, Mads, everything in maths. Pick one thing, Mads, please. Awesome, Tegan, balance of payments, English Advanced Mod B, Grace, genetic change, bio, great. Now, it's probably going to be more than just one, but this is a great starting point, guys, to help you zone in on the weak areas. So strategy number 5, what are we looking at here? Now, this is called the law of the lid, and this is really powerful, but very, very simple. Whatever you do in practice, that's essentially probably the maximum you're going to achieve. Now, I say that nicely, right? If you got 15 out of 20 in practice and you had all the time in the world, no time pressure, no stress, no anxiety, your study notes available, how do you think you'll go in the exam when you don't have study notes? It's an unseen question. You've got timer and stress. It's probably likely you'll do a little bit worse than 15 out of 20, just because it's harder. And so the point here is that whatever you do in practice, it's a really good indication of how you're going to go in the real thing. So remember that goal mark that we set, like maybe it was 85% and we had a gap of 15% we're trying to close. Well, what we want to do is to go, okay, how do I get my marks in practice as close as possible to my goal mark? Because if I can't get it to my goal mark in practice, it's not going to happen in the real thing. Now, on top of that, connected to that is something we call the +1 strategy. Because practice is easier than the real thing, if you want to get, let's say, 16 out of 20 in your trials, in your HSC exams, you're probably going to need to maybe try to get 17 out of 20 in practice, +1, because the real thing's harder. And when you go in and do the real thing, you might do a little bit worse. And so our goal needs to be in how do we get you in practice over the next 8 weeks to get your lid to your goal mark +1. Now, Chris, I feel like you were doing this by doing all those practice papers.
Very much so. My very close friend also did the subject with me, so I kind of hounded him for us to kind of work together, keep going through. So it became also a matter of pride for us to keep doing papers and get the better mark and try beat each other. So it became
That's so good. Now, obviously, we don't want it to be competitive, but that's a real great example of some constructive, friendly, helpful sort of accountability. And that links to a really great point. Ultimately, the way you will improve at anything you do, not just now in the HSC, but in life, is through a feedback loop. The more feedback that you get, the more you can take it on board and create change, and then the better you can become. And so that's why doing these practice questions to try to lift your lid is important, but you need a feedback loop. And so trial feedback was the first step in that, which we've already talked about. The second step is that you've got a couple of weeks of school left. It's week 7 right now. You've got week 8, week 9, and week 10. Now, your teachers will be largely, hopefully, available in the school holidays, but not as much. They're on holidays. So what you should try to think about when you create your plan is how can you take advantage of the next 3 weeks to submit as much as possible to your teacher, to get as much feedback from them now, instead of waiting and doing it in the holidays and then never hearing from them, or if you do, hearing from them later. And that's really, really important, because what is all of your friends going to do in the school holidays? They are going to be slamming your teacher with loads of stuff to mark. So take advantage of the next 3 weeks, really, really important, and submit whatever you can to them. Now, one of the most powerful ways to get instantaneous feedback is to actually teach someone else. If you teach someone, they're going to look at you and they're going to look at you and say, I did not get that. That made no sense. Or they're going to say, you just made all of that up. That was great BS and great fluff, but I still have no clue. Or they'll be like, amazing, that was really great. And what about this other idea that's really cool, that's going to just, wow the marker even more. And so the point being is that teaching, actually, when we interviewed high-performing students, this was the #1 strategy that they recommended for exam prep. 1, to build memory and to create really strong foundations, and 2, to be able to actually get that feedback loop and find out the stuff that you suck at before the exam, not after. Because by teaching someone, they're going to tell you all of those weak areas. Now, there's a couple of ways you can do it. #1, as Chris said, he paired up with a friend. They did papers together. It sounded like that. Did you swap papers and mark each other's? Did you teach each other in that, Chris?
Yes, very much so. It was sort of it was very much a competitive teaching to show up each other, but we did teach each other a lot.
Great. So 1, I would be creating like at least a weekly sort of session with some friends. Try to keep it to 3 maximum, so you will get plenty of time to teach, where you're turning up, you're picking the red areas of your syllabus from the traffic light, and you're going to teach that to your friend. Equally, you can also get a parent or a sibling. You can get them to quiz you using flashcards or notes. You can also teach them over dinner every single night 1 thing that you learn that you want to remember from the course that day. Some really simple ways, but seriously, guys, over and over again, I heard almost unanimously, teaching is so critical as a key study strategy. Now, the final strategy before we then sort of pull this all together is strategy #6. Failing to plan is planning to fail. If you don't have a plan for the next 8 weeks, you're not going to get all the work done that you need to, and it's not going to happen. It's going to be another late night cram last minute session. And so we know, actually, I said 8 weeks, we've actually got 7 weeks before the first exam. If we, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, yes, we've got 7 weeks by the looks of it. We need to create a plan for what you need to do over the next 7 weeks. Now, how do we do this? Well, actually, I want you guys to work backwards. I want you to go to maybe the week before, so you've got a 1 week buffer before your HSC exams begin. And I want you to go in this week here and go, what do I ideally want to be? Like, what do I want to have completed? Ideal completion by that point in time. And then I want you to work backwards to go, okay, well, what would I need to do in each of these preceding weeks so that when I get there, I'm in a solid spot. I'm not having a cram. I'm not having to freak out. I'm feeling ready and confident. Now, how can you do this? We call it a wall chart. It's a wall chart because literally you're going to write it up and you're going to stick it on your wall so that you can see it, your family can see it. It's public accountability, but also so that whenever you get something done, you can put a line through it so that you've got a real time progression on how you're going over the next 7 weeks to achieve the goal that you set yourself for your HSC exams. So what does a wall chart look like? Super helpful. Okay, 3 big areas. You want to identify, remember what you've got to fix in terms of any foundational areas, any weak areas that are your red areas, and then of course your exam prep. Now, what does this look like? Well, for example, for English Advanced, you might write down, your goal mark at the top of it, and then it's just a big to-do list to start with, okay, of what you need to do over the next 7 weeks to close the gap. Write everything down as explicitly as possible. So, memorizing essays didn't work. I'm going to use dot point plans. I didn't answer the questions. I'm going to practice adapting my dot point plans to new questions. I'm going to write a mod C. I'm going to write 2 common module practice essays. I'm going to complete 3 unseen text sections. So we've got to be specific there, right, in the numbers of what we are doing. Now, once you've done that, what you can then do is map the actions to the weeks in which you are going to do it. So that way, okay, exactly with your to-do list, what you're going to do each week so that by the time you hit, remember we had this week here as like the sort of ideal spot because this week here is the buffer zone, right? This was the buffer zone here. We want to try to create a plan so you know exactly what you need to do. And then this goes on your wall. So you don't have to think, what do I do? You don't have to procrastinate. You just look up at the wall and you're like, oh, I got to get that mod C done this week. I better get cracking on it. So there we have it, guys. they are the 6 big strategies. And what I want to highlight is we've got, set your goals. What do you need to change? Redo your trial mistakes and double down on those mistakes. Prioritize using the traffic light system. Increase your feedback loop by teaching others, and create your wall chart. What I'd love you to do is let me know in the chat, what one of these things are you going to go away and do? Now, I hope you do more than one. Chris, all of the team from UTS Insearch, we all hope that you're going to go away and do more than one of these things. But if you could only do one, what is the one thing you're going to go away and actually apply? What I'd love you to do is, let me know, leave it in the chat, okay? So that, there's some accountability, right? That you're committing to actually doing this. Mads, awesome. Traffic light, Grace, amazing. You're going to do the wall chart, fantastic. Taran, wall chart, and redoing trial mistakes. Keep them coming, guys. Now, look, our hope is that these strategies enable you to significantly turn your HSC exams around and enable you to lift your ATAR so that you can get into that course, fashion and economics and textiles and science at UTS. But it may be that you do all of this and your ATAR still looks a little bit like this, right? It still is, sad face. It's still not what you were hoping for, and you miss the ATAR cutoff. And so what we need to think about is, well, how do you create a plan, an alternate plan, so that even if as part of the, ATAR not being there and you do everything right, you can still get into your dream course at UTS. And that's where I want to share. And I want to throw back over to Chris, because Chris has a really remarkable story, guys, in terms of turning things around and having the foresight to put an alternate plan in place so that he was able to get into his dream course at UTS, despite maybe his ATAR looking a little bit like this. And I don't want to say any more. I'm going to throw over to Chris and let Chris just share a little bit of what he did when things didn't quite look as well as he wanted to, and how he still managed to get into UTS. So, Chris.
Sure thing. Hello, everyone. Yep, that's me. That's my photo. So I talked a lot about software and design and development, and that was my best subject. But all my other subjects, they weren't good at all. So I remember getting my ATAR, and I got around about 64.5, and not great, but not the worst case scenario. But I went to a school that had pretty high expectations. I went to, if you've heard of a school called Sydney Boys. Yes, Sydney Boys. I went to Sydney Boys High, and the average ATAR would be middle 90s, the average of the bottom 20s, sort of mid 80s. And when I did get my ATAR, it just kind of went, oh no, I'm done for. I'm doomed. I studied for my trials. I studied for my HSC, but it didn't really dawn on me coming through until I got my results. And all my friends were going to the major universities. All my friends were choosing the subjects that they wanted to do. And I was kind of stuck here going, okay, I can't really, follow my best friend going through. So I was a wreck afterwards. And my mother, when I told my mother, she seemed to be much calmer than me. I think she actually saw it coming, but still, we tried to figure out, my parents helped me out a lot. They tried to figure out what were my options. I knew I enjoyed software design and development the most. I knew I wanted to go to UTS. And so we started our research, and UTS Insearch came up. So going through the website, and they said they don't take ATAR, they look at HSC marks. So discussing with my mother and my father, going, okay, if you want to do software engineering, if you wanted to do ICT engineering, that's the way you can do it at UTS. So I came in, I gave in my results. They didn't look at all my results. They ignored my lowest mark. And from there, I was able to do a 1-year diploma at Insearch. And from there, that was pretty much mostly, if not all, first-year subjects, and then get into second year of UTS automatically afterwards with all the subjects that I passed, all of them recognized. And with Insearch, still very much feeling like, oh, I didn't get the mark I was looking for. I managed to still be a part of the UTS clubs and societies, managing, the exchange student club, doing volunteering work, getting work experience. And I managed to meet all these cool people. all these great people that I would further hang out with at UTS going through. So from there, I was able to get into ICT engineering
And
for
so I
my,
just want to quickly flag, because I think that's pretty remarkable, Chris. Like, 60, low 60s ATAR.
yes,
That was what, about 20 points almost below the ATAR cutoff for the advertised
very
course,
much so. That's right.
which is
But
significant, right? So I guess this is really important, guys, for just some hope for you as well, is that if you try to, you put all these strategies in place and stuff just still doesn't work out, Chris was able to get into his degree 20 points below the cutoff almost by working and going through the Insearch pathway. And I think what's fantastic about it is that, you didn't lose any time. You worked with Insearch, you actually graduated with an additional certificate, like additional education, like qualification, you got a diploma. And then you went straight into your second year of the degree, like you'd lost no time at all. Like you were with all of your friends, right, that had graduated from school the same time as you.
right, the subjects that we did were essentially UTS subjects, just taught differently, and well, to help us out because we got a low ATAR, so they had small classes and all that. So doing that, the same accreditation, and when I made my timetable for UTS, the subjects weren't you weren't able to select them because I'd already done them. So yeah.
Mm-hmm. And so what's also, I think, really cool about it is that you essentially were able to still, like, because you were learning, almost, with the same sort of lecturers, and you're able to get involved with the clubs and societies, you're essentially, which was great, fully integrated and didn't feel, I imagine, in any way distinct from all of your peers, right, that had went through and would got straight into some of their sort of dream degrees.
Oh yeah, I still managed to play. I still managed to play American football for UTS. I still was able to be part of the executive team for the various clubs and societies. And leading into UTS, I furthered that experience there.
Mm-hmm. Which is fantastic. So I think what for me, I'm taking away, guys, and this is what I'd share for all of you, is put in the strategies we've talked about today, right? Put those strategies in place, because the hope is that it'll help you turn that final 50% of your HSC marks around and lift that ATAR. But if you find yourself, right, in a situation like Chris, where, you do the work and the ATAR is not there, it's where part of that whole failing to plan is planning to fail also comes into account, which is to plan what your alternate pathways are to get into that dream degree. And, the great news is that, there are pathways, and that's where, Insearch, I think, does a fantastic job, I think, based on particularly as well, the story that Chris has shared, in really making that a seamless journey, which is really awesome. Now, Chris, I just to ask, because I'm imagining, does this apply for every subject? Like, does it matter, whatever degree you're doing, like this is available, or are there specific things, subjects it's only available for, just so students are aware of it as well?
So with the diplomas that Insearch offers, we offer engineering, IT, science, communication, design and architecture, and business. So from those 6, for most, if not all, the majors that go through, UTS changes the majors a lot, but with most, if not all, the majors going through those 6 main degrees, Insearch does offer a first year pathway for those subjects and those degrees.
Right. And then just because I'm mindful that we've got, I think, 1 minute left, guys, before we wrap up today's webinar, just so that, again, as part of this plan, guys, and creating your plan for HSC and your alternate plan to maximize your options, where do students go to just find out a little bit more? I mean, everyone's here because they're clearly thinking about, UTS as a university. Where do they go to find out a little bit more about, an alternate plan that Insearch can help them with?
Very much. You can find us. You can essentially Google us, UTS Insearch. On Google, go to the website, insearch.edu.au, I believe, off the top of my head. But we also have a Facebook page where you can get in touch with us there. And I'm sure, yep, that's right, I got it. And those are 2 of the different websites you can come contact us.
Awesome. Great. And so, yes, if you've got more questions, guys, clearly about how to do well in your HSC or how to get into UTS, Insearch, really fantastic team that can help you work through that. So definitely reach out to them. Otherwise, all the best for the upcoming HSC exams. We hope that you've got some practical strategies that will turn things around for you and help you get into that course that you're planning to at UTS.
Great. Thank you so much, Rowan. Thank you so much, Chris. Very generous in sharing your stories. If you've really enjoyed this session, we are also, Rowan's coming back on Thursday. So if you would like to recommend your friends to come along, because Rowan, I learnt stuff. There's stuff for me. I'm going to do the board. So, but no, once again, thank you, everybody. And I've put some links in the chat for you as well. But yep, recommend it to your friends for Thursday.
Cool.
Thank you all. Thanks.
Thank you very much.
See you guys.